Hey guys, Isabel here. Welcome back to Reeled In. So this past Friday, the newest Marvel movie, Black Panther Wakanda Forever, made its debut as a wonderful tribute movie to the late and great Chadwick Boseman. This movie was filled with action, emotion, and focused very heavily on character development, which honestly, I'm always here for. And before we dive in, I just want to issue a spoiler warning, as this will be a review for the movie. If you have not seen Wakanda Forever, go watch it. I'll still be here when you come back, so go watch it and then you can come watch me. But for now, let's talk about Wakanda Forever. So the movie actually opens with Shuri in her lab, and she is, as we discover, trying to find a cure for T'Challa, who is currently, as we're watching this, he's dying. I honestly think they handled this in a very interesting way. That's one of the things of the movie I was completely unsure of how they were going to handle. A part of me was actually wondering if they were just kind of going to not put it in at all and just have us as the audience know that since Chadwick is unfortunately no longer with us, that he just also was not going to be T'Challa, and T'Challa just would not be alive in this movie. Which I would have been okay with. I would have accepted it. You know, obviously us, the audience, has prior knowledge to this. So, but I am slightly glad, because not only did they just kind of put it in to explain why T'Challa is no longer present, but it also served as the beginning point of Shuri's character arc in the movie. And in a way sets up a catharsis for this movie. You know, it doesn't feel like a typical MCU movie where sometimes MCU movies just kind of are thrown in to further the storyline, the plot line of the entire MCU, but this movie was definitely just a set story, and honestly sort of taught us that, you know, people grieve in different ways, and if Phase 4 has taught us anything, it's definitely how to grieve. But again, also setting up the beginning of Shuri's storyline, of her character arc. She is trying to recreate the heart-shaped herb in order to save T'Challa. Now, we don't see T'Challa, we don't hear his voice or anything. It's just everyone's in a rush, and he is just in a separate room. And they never disclose what his illness was, which I do kind of like, because as we know from, you know, podcasts and interviews after Chadwick's passing, that he suffered in silence, and that was definitely also a theme in this movie that they do mention. So I think that was also in a way to honor him and his family, that they did not disclose his illness in this movie and made it kind of, you know, revolve around that. So I also enjoyed that as well, and I appreciated it. Also, another thing I thought the movie did a little well and actually could have done more of is sort of letting the silence speak for itself. We see this twice at the beginning when we usually have the Marvel fanfare intro. It's a tribute to Chadwick, and it's literally just all images of Chadwick as T'Challa, and there's no opening, there's no music, it's just silence. You're just watching him and you're sobbing in the theaters, literally sobbing. and it happens again at the end, where Shuri is remembering and letting her grief just kind of accept, like she's just accepting her grief at the end and, you know, reliving her happy memories, which is honestly sometimes that's the most you can do, and sometimes that's enough. But what I did, and I know, again, as I said, this was also, you know, her brother's death was a very big motivator for Shuri's actions in this movie, but I do think personally you just kind of mentioned it a little too much through dialogue. Again, this is also probably just like a creative, like my own personal creative thoughts. So in terms of it being an actual critique of the movie, not so much. But I definitely feel like we could have used more of the, you know, silence to not only let us, but to also let Shuri, you know, go through all these different emotions. So that's just like one other thing that I found interesting. It's just, you know, it's like every 5 minutes it was talking about T'Challa and his death. So again, just letting us see a little bit more like visuals on how that may be affecting all these people around him, I think would have been a little bit more powerful. Because again, the silent moments where I personally got the most emotional. But also something that I think this movie did a bit more differently than some of the Phase 4 Marvel material we have gotten is that it is action-packed, and actually sometimes it feels like it never stops. It starts off quickly, which I appreciated. There was a lot that we had to get through, so, the action started really early. With the Dora Milaje, which I love seeing, I love their action fights. I think this movie did have some of the best choreographed action we have seen in a while. I mean, the spears are going, Anika has these knives. It's just something about it just makes you feel really powerful watching it, and they're just beautiful to watch. Their movements, their fluidity, it's amazing. So definitely like high points for this movie for that. But in movies, it's always important to have action sequences sort of help tell the story, and this also did really well. It's putting worldly pressures onto the nation of Wakanda. This sequence shows that the French are trying to get vibranium for themselves. They're trying to steal it with military operations. Of course, they are kidnapped and shown to the United Nations by the Wakandans. And to be honest, I definitely thought the main antagonist of this movie was going to be the world governments. I don't know which world government it was going to be. In fact, it could have been all of them. But I definitely thought they were going to play a little bit more into that and focus a bit more into that. But again, I think at the end of the day, this movie is about overcoming grief and overcoming differences between two people. So in appreciation for that, I can kind of understand and overlook why they maybe didn't focus too much on the government aspect. And of course, again, none of us really know what's going to happen with the future of the MCU. So they could have dropped these hints there and have that be a further consequence down the road. But while watching this movie, it did kind of feel like they started with that and then just sort of had them all like kind of pull back. So just a little something I feel like probably could have been focused a little bit more on. But that's just me personally. But then in another scene, we see that the United Nations has not learned their lesson and they're still searching for vibranium with a machine that can literally find the signature of vibranium in the ocean. And this is where we are first introduced to Namor and the Talokan. And I know that they are based off of Central American culture, so mostly Mayan, I believe. In this movie, it's kind of their own nation, their own culture, but it's heavily influenced by these ancient cultures, which I really think was really nice to see. But one thing I found interesting is that when we're first introduced to them, they are acting as sirens, and they're emitting this call, and they're basically hypnotizing the workers on the ship, and they're jumping overboard. Once they jump overboard, they can get them. Now, sirens is actually from Greek mythology. I'm a bit of a mythology nerd. My main ones I know are Greek, Roman, Egyptian. But I am currently learning a bit more of the Central American type, especially the Aztecs and the Mayans. But so to have the other, they're sort of pulling a little bit from other mythologies and not just Mayan, I think is very interesting. I did not expect for them to do that. And of course, to these governments who are, encountering them for the first time, they're just these fish people in their minds. So I guess it does make sense to have a power that has been long associated with the ocean. Siren calls, sailors have always in the past reported sightings of sirens and mermaids and things like that. So to kind of include that as well into the Talokan, I think is really interesting. And also there may be reports in the ancient mythology that there was some sort of siren creature. I'm not sure yet. I'm currently reading this book just to sort of get my knowledge to start off with. So if you guys have other recommendations for books you would like me to read to increase my knowledge on this subject, I'd be happy to hear your recommendations and check them out. Leave a comment. But the vibes that we get with these siren calls, especially in the scene where it starts off at the bottom of the ocean, it's very creepy. I actually had a fear. I also have a very healthy and respectful fear of the ocean, so that's probably also played a hand in it, but I did like that some of the unknowns and, all the creatures and physical characteristics of the ocean, these people actually control. So I liked that a lot. I have a respectful fear of the ocean, but I also have an admiration for it as well. Now, another aspect I noticed in this movie that I'm glad actually sort of played out instead of just kind of introducing the concept and then just kind of leaving it in the background is this concept of old versus new, especially when it came to Queen Ramonda and Shuri. And of course it does add to family drama that we all love seeing, but it also leads to a conflict not only on the outside but also within Shuri. Queen Ramonda and even T'Challa was based, I think, in the old views of how the world works with the ancestral plane, a little bit more spiritual, sort of believing in these deities that, most people can't really see, and also keeping respect for tradition that has been in place for thousands of years. Whereas Shuri is more interested in how to advance their culture through technology and new ways of thinking. She does not 100% believe that there even is an ancestral plane. And while she has shown to have respect for her culture and her cultural traditions, when she has asked herself to partake in these traditions simply for their spiritual value, she gets a little defensive. But it definitely sets up for a very tormented Shuri as we watch her partake on her journey through this film. It gives some of her actions a lot of motivation, especially some of the actions that are a little bit more violent and less noble than maybe T'Challa would have done in the past. But also it allows her guilt to fester, which again also plays a part in her motivations. But again, I liked how this movie showed that people grieve in their own ways, and sometimes the way people grieve are polar opposites of each other. Queen Ramonda tries to take Shuri out away from the Wakandan city, from the Golden City, and burn their burial garbs, which is in a way, as I understand it, the last stage of the grieving period. Once you burn these garbs, you release your grief and become at peace with the loss that you have suffered. And Ramonda burns hers, but before Shuri can throw hers in the fire, which at this point she's not even able to physically comprehend doing that, we see Namor rise up from what I think at this point is a pond. It's a river. Now, I don't know if this was talked about in the movie or if it's confirmed in this movie or not, but I think part of his powers he has in the comics is that he can actually travel in any body of water. I'm hesitant to say it's like a teleportation or like a portal system, but essentially because he has these water powers, he can pop up in any body of water that he chooses. So he can even pop up out of a lake if he has to, I think. Again, don't quote me directly on that, but as I was doing research on this character, I remember reading something about that, so I think those are more of his comic powers. I think in this movie they just had it that he kind of swam from the ocean. I think is like 100,000 kilometers or something, which technically is possible. There are many rivers that snake through Africa that can be connected from the sea and then connect to larger lakes, so it could technically be possible, but I do like the mystical power of him just kind of teleporting from body of water to body of water. Now, before this movie even came out, they did say that Namor wasn't a villain. He wasn't the main villain. In fact, he doesn't think of himself as a villain. If anything, he is technically considered the antagonist, but in a way, I believe they also made it a little bit like they did with Thanos' character, where technically Thanos was the protagonist and the Avengers were the antagonist. And that's if you look directly at the definition of what a protagonist and an antagonist is. But this movie really had me mentally on my toes. I understood both points of views, both Namor's and Shuri's, and although I do think, not everyone's viewpoints were perfect in this movie, obviously that's the whole point of it, but I really found myself struggling at certain points on who I thought should kind of come up on top. And it wasn't even where, we're introduced to this character Namor, and at first the audience views him as being really bad, and then we get a backstory, and then we realize, oh, he's not, he has a reason. They showed his reasoning and his want to protect his people from the very beginning, and I'm so glad they did that, because it showed us early on that this man is not just here to do bad. He has his own reasons. Everyone has their own reasons for doing something, and so the fact that they showed that pretty much from the very first dialogue we get with him, I thought was really awesome. And we get some recurring characters from the first Black Panther movie. M'Baku is one of them. I honestly loved his character a lot, and I'm glad that we saw him again and also saw him in a bit of a different light. In this movie, he's kind of the voice of reason, the unbiased opinion, and also the person who points out everyone else's flaws, especially when that person needs to hear it. Now, I personally love characters like that. I love the characters that in some way, shape, or form sort of have an insight to what every other character is thinking and then can sort of deliberate other actions and offer suggestions based off of that. So I really liked what they did with M'Baku's character, and the fact that he also acts as a little bit of an older sibling for Shuri. I also appreciated that because I think, obviously at one point in the movie, she does not have any family left. So the fact that she can still rely on M'Baku to sort of be there and back her, but also offer guidance for her, I really liked that. I liked what they did with that. But now we're introduced to a new character who gets her own Disney Plus show later next year, and I am so excited to watch it, and I was so happy to see her in this movie. We are introduced to Riri Williams, who attends MIT, which is where Tony Stark also attended, and currently I believe MJ and Ned are also attending MIT. So I don't know, are they friends? Do they have group study sessions together? I kind of hope so. I kind of hope it all connects in the end. But getting ahead of myself, Riri honestly provided some of the best humor, which I will also get back to on a little negative side note on that. In this movie, her character was a little bit of a MacGuffin, sort of someone to just kind of drive the plot point forward. But again, in terms of a character introduction, I think it worked really well with the movie. Sometimes, especially in past MCU movies, you introduce a character, and sometimes it's literally, you can tell that this character is there to introduce the character for a future movie or series. They kind of get pushed to the back burner. Their character development is a bit more 2D. But Riri definitely felt like she had depth. Her reactions were really real. Like if the Princess of Wakanda came and tried to kind of, in a way, kind of kidnap me, I probably have a very similar reaction to Riri. So, she's very real. She had depth. I think I already said that. And she started off in a way where we see she's already competent in what she knows and what she can do. Obviously super smart, built her own Stark prototype, basically. So towards the end of the movie, when she kind of has to do a very similar thing to help the Wakandans, it's believable. Sometimes it's like when they introduce a new character, then this new character is based on ground zero, and then throughout the movie, they need to sort of improve, and sometimes that time period for improvement can get lost, and by the time when they get their power or their knowledge, whatever they have to get by the end of the movie, it just feels a little forced. I just feel like they went from not knowing how to do it to doing it with relative ease without practice or any learning curve or anything. So again, in terms of character introductions, I think Riri had a really good one. She was used a little bit as kind of a comic relief in certain situations. I mean, obviously she is more than just her comedic abilities. We know she's super smart, as I just said. Loved seeing her workshop. But I know in the past, sometimes people of color can just kind of be used as a comedic relief and leave out kind of the depths of just being a person, with different characterizations, different wants and likes and dislikes. So I definitely don't think that's at all what they're trying to do here. But I feel like in the future, and not this director, not Ryan, but just any director in the future, I feel like should probably be careful of that. But since we are on the subject of humor, I think this movie had, honestly, the perfect amount of humor. Again, the MCU especially, I feel like can definitely try and force the humor onto the audience, sometimes with quips or witty comebacks, or as we've seen kind of recently in certain movies, inappropriate jokes, which I get some people, the younger generation, finds that funny. And then sometimes it feels like they'll just kind of throw it in to make something funny. So again, also in this movie, an improvement. I think the humor wasn't all the time, and the humor was definitely more personal. It wasn't for the characters in the movie to say to the audience. It was between two different characters in the movie, which again, I think made it more funny because it added to the characterization of all these different aspects. And so I was very pleasantly surprised with that one. But now we have another action sequence, and one thing I think both the original Black Panther movie and this Black Panther movie do a great job in is their car chase scenes. And when it comes to action, chase scenes are probably one of my favorite. I think they're a lot of people's favorite. No, I think this one was executed very well. You have 3 different vehicles, essentially. Koye gets the car, Shuri gets the motorcycle. Didn't know I needed to see her on one until now. But Riri gets her Mark 1 suit. I'm unsure if this is a Stark tech suit, but obviously it's fashioned from one. It's inspired by one. And now, as much as I do love Riri, I'm not the biggest fan of Tony Stark. I appreciate that he started the MCU and what that means to a lot of people. So I appreciate all of that. But in terms of his characterization, not the biggest fan, and I'm also getting a little tired of hearing Tony Stark mentioned over and over again. Like, let him rest, please, in peace, please. But I will say I am much more impressed with Riri's Mach 1 than Stark's Mach 1. And I know the argument is that if Tony didn't do his Mach 1, no one else could do their own Mach 1s. I understand that. But the reason why I'm more impressed with hers is because it's open. Like, her body, all her vulnerable parts are open to harm. She literally, and I know Tony Stark also did this, and I forgot which movie it was, but he also ran out of oxygen by flying too high. But again, he was still full in his metal suit. Riri is still out in the open doing the same thing. And I just feel like it says a lot about her character that she's willing to help all these people without having proper protection for herself. Anything could happen to her. She literally fell. I feel like any normal person who was flying at like 100 some miles an hour and gets yanked down to the concrete with her body exposed would have died. Of course, this is a Marvel movie, so you can't have that just yet. But you know, I feel like it says a lot about her. Also that she can be a little reckless, but that's fine. A lot of characters in the MCU are a bit reckless. But just that she's willing to put herself through possible injury, for some reason just makes me like her a lot more. But then we get an amazing scene on the bridge between Okoye and Talokan, which is honestly very impressive. Okoye always impresses me, but she's also, like, just this scene, I was like, we stan a queen. And also during this scene, we get a little bit more information on Namor's generals, which is Namora and Atuma. Now, in the comics, Atuma is kind of a rival to Namor, so interesting that they kind of made him Namor's like right hand, or one of his left hand, like one of the people who Namor trusts and relies on without question. You know, he is strong and powerful, but to be honest, I wish we got a little bit more depth with him. I feel like on most of the movie, he just kind of kept like pointing at Okoye and was like, warrior, you know, can't beat me, come try and beat me, which is of course fun, but I did wish we got a little bit more of him. I also wish we got a little bit more of Namora. For some reason, I thought she was going to be related to Namor. I can't remember in the comics if she is or isn't, or who she is in the comics, honestly. But she said some really good lines, and I like that she, out of everyone else, I think, she's the one who sort of challenges Namor the most, sort of to make sure everything's okay within Talokan and making sure that Namor is making, you know, decisions that's best for his people. So that is a part of her character that I was very intrigued with. And again, I wish we saw a little bit more of that. But Shuri and Riri are taken at Shuri's behest because Okoye has just lost this battle. Unfortunately, she was doing really, really well. But there was a lot of them. Unfortunately, she was defeated. But then we get to see Everett Ross, who is a bit more kind of like a double agent almost in this movie, which is very interesting seeing him be, was he a CIA operative? Whoever he was, American government in the first movie, to sort of being a secret informant for the Wakandans. And I understand that they saved his life and everything, but I feel like Everett is taking his debt very seriously. But then not only do we see him again, we see freaking Val. I can't stand her. Did not expect to see her in this movie. And just the rage that filled my body upon seeing her. And like, I understand, you know, Thunderbolts was announced, so you're setting up a bunch of hints, you know, in these other movies and shows for that. You have been in the past with John Walker being recruited, when she was talking to Yelena, like, leave Yelena alone, she's been through enough. But now we see that she is the director of the CIA, hello, which again has its own implications for Thunderbolts. I will have a discussion with my friend Connor very soon. We'll probably discuss that a little bit more in detail. But for now, this is a Wakanda Forever review. So, and also just one more thing. They were married. Everett and Val were married. Are you kidding me? I don't know. I feel like this movie focused a lot on them. And again, the focus was to put, you know, world power pressures onto Wakanda. So Wakanda's feeling pressure not only from the world, but also from Namor. And so I'm just like, you know, it just, that part of it just didn't really go anywhere. because, they were threatening, the United States is going to invade Wakanda. First, impossible. Good luck. Second, okay, so the movie ended eventually, and then nothing really came of that. Again, I understand the focus is on, this kind of being more of a tribute movie. At least that's how it felt like to me, but still, if you put it in there, I feel like you gotta conclude. But then to play devil's advocate, I think most of the MCU movies now kind of introduce a subplot in a movie, and then they wait like 3 movies later to finish it. That personally annoys me. I feel like if you're gonna have a plot or a subplot in the movie, kind of make a nice kind of conclusion for it in that movie, and then talk about it again in the future. That's just me though. Other people like it. They like that connectivity. I like certain aspects of the connectivity, but for now, like, come on. But then we find out a lot about Namor's backstory, how he calls himself a mutant, which this is the second or third time, probably second, since I think Miss Marvel was kind of the first one to sort of start opening up that mutant topic of conversation into the MCU. But one thing I did enjoy a lot and appreciated a lot about this movie is that, obviously this movie for the most part is in English, so the audience can kind of understand. But I liked that a very good chunk of conversations that happened in this movie are in everyone's native language. And then you have the subtitles. Fun fact, the subtitles are actually color coordinated between the different languages that they speak. I forgot the colors because I saw this literally a whole weekend ago. So, but I liked that a lot. I remember sitting in the theater and just kind of like nodding my head in approval. I was like, yes, this is good. We like this. Thank you. But in this backstory, we can kind of see that there are a lot of similarities between Wakanda and Talokan. Not only how their protector kind of came to be, what with at the time T'Challa and Namor, but also just in the structure of their actual city. And also at this point in time, there are many similarities between Namor and Shuri. If you really think about it, they're in a way kind of the same person. At least that's what I think the movie was trying to depict to us, which again makes their eventual ceasefire than the movie make a bit more sense and be a little bit more meaningful. And I'll talk about that a little bit more once I get to that. But also another thing I like about Namor is that he is honest. He's not, or at least I think at this point in time, he's not really conniving for anything. He literally just wants one thing, and that is to protect his people. Even if I personally think his way of doing that is a little bit extremist, that's just my personal opinion. But, he didn't really, he was willing to listen to Shuri. He was willing to listen to what she had to say. And, I liked before all the starting happened, they had a conversation. Like a deep conversation. It was quiet. There was no yelling. There was no arguing. At least not what I think one depicts when they think a protagonist and an antagonist argues with each other. But also, it makes another parallel that the start of all this conflict happens due to a mother's love. It's obvious to say that Namor's mother loved him and he loved his mom, and his conflict with the land dwellers, the outer world, happened when he was fulfilling his mother's last wish to be buried where she was born on land. And he comes into contact with, I think, the conquistadors, and they have the slaves, and so that's where his whole gripe became with the upper world, essentially. And then the personal conflict between Namor and the Wakandans happened because Queen Ramonda basically pulled a sneaky move in order to get Shuri out of there. She sent Nakia pretty much as like a search and rescue mission, and of course there was casualties, and sometimes it only takes one shot and then a whole war breaks out. So I did like that parallel a lot. And of course, Namor begins his first attack on Wakanda, floods the city, destroys a bunch of infrastructure, essentially. And now I was not at all expecting this, but he drowns Queen Ramonda. Although he didn't drown her exactly. But again, with a mother's love, she sacrificed herself to save Riri. So there's just a lot of love going on around here, and it's making me really sad. It's causing a lot of pain. But again, going back to that old versus new, we have a shot that focuses on the cascading water coming into the throne room and actually kind of wipes it away. It wipes away the throne and kind of submerges everything. And I definitely took that to personally mean that through all of this, it is kind of destroying the old ways and it's kind of like cleansing it a little bit. So it's kind of destroying the old and allowing, Shuri, who encompasses the new way of thought, to kind of rise to the surface. And so again, Shuri, who has not only lost her father, her brother, she has also lost her mother within the span of a year, really. And so Shuri does what she does best, and she kind of locks herself away in the lab. Now when I first saw this movie, I had the idea that Wakanda and Talokan could not really survive without the other, although thinking upon that, I definitely think they could. But the reason I thought that originally was because it was the gift that Namor gave Shuri, the bracelet with this vibranium plant that came out of the ocean that allowed him to have powers. Obviously a sister to the purple heart-shaped herb that allowed T'Challa and the Black Panthers before him to have their powers. Again, parallels, we love parallels. But basically that is what allowed Shuri to recreate the heart-shaped herb, the synthetic heart-shaped herb. Basically their DNA was very similar. Now I was a little surprised that Shuri was the only one who took the herb. For some reason, I did think that there was going to be maybe like 3 or 4 women, Shuri including maybe some of the Dora Milaje that were going to take it. But, I'm happy and I accept that she was the only one. And let me just say, this ancestral plane scene is probably my favorite in the entire movie. We get a surprise cameo from Killmonger, which I know a lot of people wanted to see. Again, I'm kind of the person who's like, if they're resting in peace, let them rest in peace. Although I don't know if Killmonger ever really has peace in life, or maybe even in death. But I'm gonna be totally honest, this scene especially, and then some other smaller scenes through in the movie, it gave me really big like Lion King vibes. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but that's just kind of what I got from it. But again, depicting how everyone handles grief differently. Shuri handled her a lot through anger and her want for revenge and vengeance. So in a way, she actually is a lot like Killmonger, though she may not want to believe that at the beginning. And then again, we get a pretty awesome fight scene. I always love when fight scenes also coincide with strategy. Sometimes in the MCU, a fight scene's literally just a fight scene. But Shuri and Riri and Okoye and Nakia, they all band together to make this big plan to sort of weaken Namor so they can defeat him. And there was so much going on during this fight scene, I actually forgot to take notes, but I picked up when they were on the beach and Shuri fried him like a fish. But I think this scene also kind of depicts that, Shuri and Namor, they kind of are the same person. Their own grief and that pain them, they have very similar reactions to it. At this moment, both of these characters are pretty much like an inch from death. They're fighting death, and in a way they kind of sync up. And I don't think literally, but I think figuratively they sync up, and they have all of these visions from their past and their past ancestors. And we see Shuri's visions kind of first, and all of the conflict and pain that has been inflicted upon her are sort of reversing, which kind of symbolizes her healing, both physically and mentally, because her wounds are healing because she now has the powers of the Black Panther, but also her psychological ailments are healing as well. There is a little bit of finding your inner peace within this movie, and I don't think Shuri would have been able to do that until she had gone through all of this and sort of met the problem head on. I think she was avoiding it for a long time, so finally being able to kind of look her actions in the face was probably very healing for her. Because in her mind, it was her past actions that had led to all of her own pain and suffering. And Namor, he sees his mother. If you think about it, kind of started his own inner conflict in the first place. So to see her offering her hand to help him back up, very powerful. And I think they both found, the shared wisdom of their ancestors and called a truce for for one another. But now I'm hesitant on all of that because at the end we do see that Namor kind of always has a plan. You know, he did not accept his defeat simply because he acknowledged, you know, this may not be the correct way to go about his deeds, but because currently Wakanda has no allies, and when they are in trouble, they will call upon him. And then they will be indebted to everyone, and I don't know, I didn't like that. I was like, you thought, he's always got a plan though. He's always got a plan. And then at the end, we finally see Shuri, but I think to kind of be cleansing herself. She finally burns her burial robes, and I'm glad she didn't burn them the first time. Obviously, we didn't know at the time, but Queen Ramonda was unfortunately passed away in this movie, and so she had to wear the same burial robes. So not only is she letting go of T'Challa, but also her mother. And we end with, again, letting the silence speak for itself with a lovely montage of T'Challa. And the memories focused a lot of T'Challa and Shuri together, which I did appreciate. It was their happy moments together that she was finally being able to see after so much time spent in, I'm sure, the dark of her mind. Now this movie is a little bit different. It's a bit like Endgame, where it did not have an end credit, but it did have a mid credit. And personally, I actually am still not sure how to feel about it. Because it's revealed that T'Challa had a son, whose name is also T'Challa. We have a T'Challa Jr., although his Haitian name is Toussaint. Sorry if I pronounced one of those incorrectly. But that does translate to All Saints. I appreciate that he is kind of like the legacy of T'Challa, and I think T'Challa's ancestors before him. Because I do think since the heart-shaped herb is synthetic, Shuri is kind of the new line of the Black Panthers. I don't know, because I don't think they said it really, but I don't know if Shuri would be able to see her past ancestors from that heart-shaped herb. I think that may just be the last ones that Killmonger destroyed in the fire. And again, I could be wrong. That's just a thought process I had, since one is actually a bit more synthetic than the other one. But again, they're both made of vibranium, or they're from vibranium, so I could totally be wrong. But I was kind of under the impression, and I enjoyed thinking that Shuri was the one to kind of uphold the legacy, because she is his sister, after all. And I feel like, in a way, it took my focus away from Shuri and her accomplishment at the end and her struggle and everything she went through in this movie. And now the only thing I can focus on is that T'Challa has a son, which I definitely think was cute, and I definitely think was an interesting way to sort of, you know, T'Challa's gone, but not, you know, only in the physical sense, really. I don't know. I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts on how you felt about him having a son, because it definitely sets up, you know, future stories. Because I don't believe Shuri wants to be queen. I don't think she does. So it might set up a future king of Wakanda with this T'Challa, although I'm not sure how the other Wakandans would feel about it, since he was not raised in Wakanda. We kind of saw that with Killmonger, that because he wasn't really raised there, they didn't really view him as being completely Wakandan. So that will be another conflict if that's the road they go down. But very interesting, yeah. Well, guys, that was my review for the newest Marvel movie, Black Panther Wakanda Forever. I definitely think this is one of the better movies, and I guess MCU installments, because they're, you know, Disney Plus series. It's one of the better ones of Phase 4. I appreciated it because it is also the ending movie of Phase 4. So I appreciated that it didn't necessarily focus, and again, I said this earlier, but it didn't necessarily focus on moving the MCU storyline forward. It was definitely, I think, a niche storyline that it focused on. And it focused a lot more on characters. And sometimes, honestly, characters make the movie. I feel like you can have an amazing plot, but if your characters are one-dimensional, two-dimensional, it's not going to be great. So the fact that this focused on the characters and their own feelings and emotions, I think was a really good call. And again, a lovely tribute movie. This definitely, I feel like, was a tribute movie to give everyone, you know, actors, characters, audience closure for Chadwick and T'Challa. So I appreciate that a lot. But guys, leave a like on the video. Comment, what do you think about the movie? Did you like it? Did you hate it? I've been hearing a lot of mixed reviews. And be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future Marvel reaction videos as well as Marvel discussion videos. But guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.